It is 0214 hours over the darkness of the South China Sea, where the humid air currents clash with the cold vacuum of altitude 30,000 feet above the disputed waters near the Paracel Islands. A distinct aerodynamic profile cuts through the night. This is a United States Navy P-8 Poseidon, a militarized derivative of the Boeing 737 airframe, purpose-built for maritime patrol and reconnaissance. Inside the pressurized fuselage, the hum of cooling fans dominates. The aircrew is monitoring a complex array of sensor feeds, conducting a lawful surveillance route southwest of the archipelago. The mission profile is standard: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, designed to monitor shipping lanes and electronic emissions in the region. But the routine nature of this patrol is about to shatter. At 0214 hours, the passive sensors on board the Poseidon trigger an alert.
A fast-moving radar signature is detected approaching from the northwest. The return is faint at first, indicating a low observable platform. But the telemetry confirms the object is closing at speeds exceeding Mach 1.4. This velocity profile at low altitude is not characteristic of civilian traffic. It is the distinct intercept vector of a military fighter aircraft, specifically the Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon, China's most advanced fifth-generation stealth interceptor. Inside the flight station of the P-8, the atmosphere shifts instantly. Mission Commander Lieutenant Commander Hughes reviews the tactical display. The closure rate is aggressive and the separation distance is collapsing rapidly. Hughes issues a directive to the flight deck crew. Contact approaching at high closure rate. Maintain course, do not escalate.
The objective is to assert navigation rights without provoking an incident. However, the approaching aircraft is not adhering to safe interception standards. Standard procedure requires an identifying approach from a visible quadrant, but the J-20 pilot is executing a tactical stern conversion, positioning the fighter directly behind the defenseless surveillance aircraft. At 0215 hours, the situation escalates from observation to engagement. The J-20 onboard Type 1475 active electronically scanned array radar activates. It locks on to the P-8 fuselage in a single target track mode. This is not a scan for situational awareness. This is a fire control lock used to guide weapons. The P-8 radar warning receiver screams a high-pitched tone, alerting the American crew that they are being painted by a targeting beam. A sensor operator in the back of the Poseidon notes the data,
stating later that the Chinese pilot was not observing, he was hunting. At 0216 hours, the stealth fighter makes visual contact. Breaking out of the darkness, the J-20 cuts across the nose of the P-8. The vertical separation is less than 50 meters. At these velocities, the wake turbulence alone is a physical hazard. The heavy P-8 airframe shudders as it passes through the fighter's jet wash. High-resolution infrared footage, later analyzed by defense officials, shows the J-20 moving with deliberate and aggressive control. The fighter circles to the left side of the American aircraft, positioning itself slightly ahead and above the cockpit. Then, without any radio communication or warning signals, the Chinese pilot activates the dispense switch on the throttle. A full burst of infrared countermeasure flares ejects from the fuselage. More than a dozen magnesium and Teflon pellets ignite instantly.
Burning at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, they form a wall of blinding white fire directly in the P-8 flight path. The reaction in the American cockpit is immediate and visceral. The cockpit voice recorder captures the pilot shouting, "Flares! Flares! Brake right now!" The pilot flying disengages the autopilot and hauls the yoke right. The heavy aircraft banks sharply, descending 300 feet in mere seconds. The burning flares streak past the nose and canopy, illuminating the flight deck with a harsh and blinding strobe effect. Had the aircraft not maneuvered, the flares could have been ingested. The CFM56 turbofan engines are vulnerable to foreign object damage. Ingesting a burning magnesium pellet could cause catastrophic compressor stall. U.S. Navy officials later described this as an unsafe and unprofessional action, labeling it a direct violation of the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea.
Chinese military sources would later dispute this account, claiming the flares were a defensive measure against American encroachment, but the telemetry data tells a different story of aggression. At 0217 hours, the engagement enters the electronic spectrum. As the P-8 stabilizes from the evasive descent maneuver, the radar warning receiver lights up with a new threat indication. The J-20 is no longer just flying, it is jamming. the Chinese fighter begins emitting narrow-beam electronic interference, targeting the Poseidon APY-10 maritime surveillance radar. This is a digital radio frequency memory jamming technique designed to blind the American crew and degrade their sensor picture. The mission technician describes the jamming as focused and deliberate, stating that the signal strength indicated a high-power emission. Telemetry shows the source originated from the J-20 side-mounted arrays,
likely the Fighter Internal Electronic Support Measure Suite. This was a test of the American electronic hardening capabilities. At 0218 hours, the physical intimidation resumes. The J-20 pilot applies afterburner and accelerates sharply, closing the distance to less than 20 meters off the P-8 wingtip. This is a dangerous proximity for dissimilar aircraft. The American crew can look across the gap and see the Chinese pilot. The canopy-to-canopy alignment is a classic Cold War tactic, intended to impose psychological pressure on the surveillance crew. According to intelligence reports, the J-20 pilot makes a hand signal, a sharp cutting motion across the throat, a signal used by PLA interceptors to order foreign aircraft to depart. The P-8 crew ignores the gesture, maintaining their lawful heading, adhering strictly to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command rules of engagement.
But the J-20 has one more kinetic maneuver to execute. At 0219 hours, the fighter deploys a second flare burst. This salvo is released with almost zero separation distance. The proximity is critical, and the intensity is overwhelming. The P-18 infrared sensors are instantly saturated by the heat bloom. Technicians are forced to shut down several optical systems, preventing the sensitive thermal imagers from burning out permanently. For 12 agonizing seconds, the U.S. aircraft is effectively flying blind, reliant only on basic flight instruments and visual lookout. Internal reports cite the co-pilot's assessment of the danger, noting that engine ingestion was a near certainty if they had not dived. The J-20 then pulls up sharply into a vertical climb, vanishing into the cloud cover at high subsonic speed, leaving the shaken American crew to assess the situation.
At 0220 hours, the P-8 crew declares an emergency condition. They transmit a Code 3 advisory back to Pacific Command, signaling an aggressive intercept that threatened the safety of flight. The response across the theater is rapid and coordinated. Other U.S. assets in the sector immediately shift their patrol routes. A nearby Arleigh Burke-class destroyer elevates its readiness posture, preparing for potential follow-on encounters with the hostile flight. Chinese state media would later release a brief statement claiming a foreign aircraft was warned and repelled from the area. But the United States Navy does not let the incident stand. At 0227 hours, a systematic response is initiated. 7 minutes after the flare incident, the P-8 continues southward, stabilizing its altitude and bringing the mission systems back online. There were no physical injuries among the crew, but the infrared targeting suite is showing signs of thermal stress. Technicians initiate emergency cooling cycles to save the sensors. In Washington, the Pacific Operations Watch Floor receives the sitrep. A senior official characterizes the event as controlled intimidation. Indo-Pacific Command authorizes an immediate escalation in surveillance. The order is to shadow the intercept area and document everything. Do not disengage from the region and maintain presence. This decision activates the broader naval network. At 0233 hours, the surface fleet joins the fight. The USS Ralph Johnson, a guided missile destroyer, is on patrol, positioned north of the P-8 route, conducting freedom of navigation ops. Upon receiving the flare report, the ship shifts to Tactical Condition 2, activating the full power of its SPY-1D air search radar.
This system is capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. Radar technicians aboard the destroyer detect multiple faint contacts. The returns are low radar cross-section, but consistent with stealth. Analysis suggests the J-20 that engaged the P-8 was not alone. There are indications of a three-ship formation operating in the sector. At 0238 hours, the Chinese response escalates further. Thermal satellites detect rapid runway activity at Woody Island. This is a major PLA airbase in the Paracel chain. Data indicates the launch of 2 additional J-20 fighters, accompanied by a pair of older J-11B air superiority fighters. This is a heavy force package designed to overwhelm the airspace. Chinese state media claims this is a routine readiness drill, but U.S. defense officials recognize the pattern of layered escalation. Beijing is preparing for a possible American counter-reaction. At 0242 hours, the P-8 begins a detailed damage assessment. The flight engineer reports to PACOM on the status of the aircraft.
The infrared camera cooling system is degraded but functional. The heat from the flares was intense enough to risk sensor fusion. The report notes that 10 meters closer would have been catastrophic. Despite the risk, the P-8 resumes its surveillance mission. The crew performs manual lookout rotations to supplement the sensors. At 02:49 hours, the radio silence is broken. Nearly 30 minutes after the incident, a Chinese ground controller transmits, "U.S. aircraft, you have violated Chinese security zone. Leave immediately." This communication via ground station is procedurally unusual. Intercepts typically involve direct communication from the pilot. Analysts suspect the earlier flare use may have been unauthorized and that Chinese command is attempting to reassert control.
Indo-Pacific Command rejects the territorial claim, immediately responding that they are conducting lawful operations in international airspace. The silence that follows suggests confusion within the PLA chain of command. In a high-tension region, such ambiguity is extremely dangerous. At 0253 hours, the USS Ralph Johnson launches aviation assets. An MH-60R Seahawk helicopter spins up and lifts off the deck. Equipped with multispectral targeting and passive acoustic monitoring, its mission is to track the flight path of the J-20s and to collect undeniable proof of any further unsafe behavior. Defense sources state the helicopter captures thermal signatures, identifying the heat plume of the J-20 afterburner surge. These findings are classified and stored for diplomatic leverage. At 0302 hours, China plays a new card. A PLA Y-8Q patrol aircraft enters the operational box. This is the Chinese equivalent to the American P-3 Orion.
Equipped with a magnetic anomaly detector for hunting submarines, its presence indicates Beijing fears a subsurface threat. They assume the U.S. has positioned submarines to support the P-8. This assumption is tactically sound and accurate. At 0307 hours, a U.S. submarine makes its presence known. A Virginia-class fast attack submarine surfaces briefly south of the Paracel territory to establish communications. This maneuver is rare and sends a powerful message of deterrence. It signals that American power is present beneath the waves. China immediately shifts two J-11B fighters toward the coordinates, assuming the submarine is coordinating with the destroyer. At 0314 hours, the aerial standoff reaches its peak. The P-8 continues its intelligence collection run, gathering electronic intelligence data on Chinese radar sites. Suddenly, the aircraft radar warning receiver lights up again. Another J-20 radar sweep is detected from a different azimuth.
Flight records indicate this is a coordinated bracket maneuver, a tactic used to pressure a target from multiple angles simultaneously. The P-8 commander issues a calm but sharp transmission. Unprofessional behavior will be documented and reported. Recommend safe separation. There is no reply from the Chinese pilots. The J-20 closes to within 400 meters of the surveillance aircraft. Instead of flares, the pilot executes a barrel roll, passing over the nose of the P-8 in a show of force. U.S. pilots log this maneuver as hostile aerobatic intimidation. At 0321 hours, the U.S. enters a high-level alert posture. Carrier Strike Group 5 in Japan places a destroyer on standby. Kadena Air Base prepares F-15C Eagles for potential launch. Satellite imagery confirms further aircraft activity near Hainan Island. The entire region is poised on the edge of a kinetic exchange.
At 0329 hours, a ground-based threat emerges. A powerful HQ-9B air defense system illuminates the P-8. The radar lock originates from Sansha City and lasts for 6 seconds. This is a firing solution lock from a surface-to-air missile battery. It is long enough to register as an imminent threat, but short enough to stop before triggering an automatic defensive response. Analysts mark this as the moment of maximum danger. One accidental miscalculation could have led to a missile launch. At 0333 hours, the tension suddenly breaks. All 3 J-20 radar signatures fade from the scopes. PLA Command has likely instructed a withdrawal, realizing the scale of the U.S. naval and aerial response. The combination of the destroyer, helicopter, and submarine is effective. The Chinese aircraft retreat toward the airfield at Woody Island. The U.S. P-8 holds its course for another 40 minutes. Completing its intelligence sweep before turning for base, at 1200 hours, the final assessment has compiled. By dawn, the physical incident is concluded. But the data war is only just beginning. U.S. intelligence aggregates the full sensor logs and video. A diplomatic protest is drafted and sent to Beijing. Indo-Pacific Command increases the frequency of aerial patrols. Chinese state media denies any misconduct occurred. But internally, the U.S. Defense Department reaches a conclusion. The J-20 pilot flare burst was a deliberate act of aggression. A senior U.S. intelligence officer summarizes the event in a briefing, stating that in the digital battlespace, information is the only hard currency. And this encounter was a test of resolve and technology. In the South China Sea, every test is a warning, and the line between peace and war is measured in seconds.